Welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast, presented by Orion Advisor Solutions and hosted by Dr. Daniel Crosby, Orion's Chief Behavioral Officer and New York Times best-selling author. Each week, Dr. Crosby interviews a fascinating new guest on a range of compelling topics, from literature to psychology to financial wellness. To learn more about Dr. Crosby's behavioral finance work at Orion, visit www.orion.com.
Hey, Standard Deviations listeners. Did you know that you could be receiving continuing education credit for listening to certain podcast episodes? That's right. There are continuing education credits available for CFP board advisors, along with CMAs, CPWAs, and RMAs for certain episodes. The Advisor Academy is Orion's free, continuing education platform for advisors where you can get CE credits on the go. The platform offers a handful of podcast episodes that you can either listen to or watch and receive CE credit. Check the podcast description for more details or visit orionadvisorakademy.myabsorb.com and use code PODCASTS, that's podcast with an S, to sign up. Note, not all podcast episodes qualify for CE credit. You must listen or watch through the Orion Advisor Academy to receive the credit. Visit orion.com/advisor-academy to learn more. Hello and welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Crosby, and I'm joined today by one of the finest young voices in the industry. It's Emily Blue. She's a co-founder of Hue Partners. Prior to launching Hue, she was the head of corporate development for Caprock, where she led M&A deal structure and negotiations. Before that, Emily was director of M&A with Mariner, where she lived and breathed post-deal corporate integration. She's a CFA charter holder who started her career in asset management and lives in Kansas City with her husband and 3 children. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Super excited. And as a math nerd, I love your title.
Yeah, no, it's like a wink. It's a wink and a nod to people who get it. Like, what's a title that could speak to market stuff and also the insanity that we all deal with? Standard Deviations. I thought about calling my listeners deviants for a while. Like, you know how some podcasts would be like, welcome, whatever. And then I felt like that was ill-advised. So we didn't go with that.
This is good.
Yeah, no, you get that better than most. Okay, so we're going to talk today. You are a wealth of knowledge. I met you a while back. You have taught me so much already. But we're going to talk today about the process of selling your business. And specifically, we're going to talk about the behavioral sort of obstacles to that. Every advisor, right, dreams about or thinks about selling their business one day. But you say there is a huge delta between sort of how it's popularly conceptualized and how it actually goes down. What's the disconnect, and what should people know about the process that they don't currently understand in their daydreaming about making big bucks and living by the shore?
Love that. You think about seeing Instagram or a highlight reel, and you can look at that and say, okay, that's not fully that person's reality. They only show this side, or, they don't show any of the other, chaos in their life. I think that our industry has a highlight reel of inorganic growth. So in the press, you're seeing all the highlights of this transaction closed with this party, this other party, and there's a celebration and you see the end, which is so exciting. But what sometimes gets lost is the journey to get there. So when somebody is getting ready or contemplating the process of entering into the M&A journey, there is so much psychology and there's all sorts of elements that come into play that don't feel the same as what they're seeing on the headlines of the celebration and the ending and the finale and the great outcome. So there is this element of the journey through the process sometimes gets lost or is not highlighted as much. So you see the end, but you don't see the emotional Sometimes, I like to call it the roller coaster, right? There's all the emotions that come through and get showcased during the whole process, which are all so normal. But because you don't see it as much or you don't talk about it as much, it's hard to reconcile the two experiences.
So, there's a lot of Jonathan Haidt and others have been in the press recently for talking about how social media makes us so sad. And it's because of this very thing of comparing sort of the nitty gritty of our lives to the highlight reel of someone else's lives. And I think it leads us to make some pretty profound misattributions and try and structure our life, the wrong way and chase the wrong things. Knowing what you know about how the sausage gets made, what are the most important things that are missing besides, crossing that finish line in the big payday? What are the big things that are missing that people should be aware of?
I think that the biggest thing that gets, lost is one, all these founders, especially in wealth management, have seen their own clients sell their business and have been that guiding light for their client.
Yeah.
And so they think that starting that process, because they've been that for somebody else, that they're immune to some of the things that they've witnessed their client experience.
Yeah.
And so when you add that with, sometimes people try, and the buy side is so sophisticated. Every day there's new buyers that are entering the market. And so the inbound activity that a advisor receives from potential buyers is at rates that are insane. Like they far surpass fund wholesalers. And so there is a concept of, well, maybe I'll take the first call or I'll get to know them or, I'll start trying to go down this path alone. And so I think those two things play an interesting role in the journey. And then the other element that sometimes gets lost is when you are going at it alone as a single founder, we don't talk about enough how lonely it can be, because there isn't anyone, else to sometimes talk to as you're trying to make a very big strategic decision on behalf of the firm. And so all of those kind of play an interesting dynamic in the M&A journey, and having help and a guide helping navigate them through that process and through all the stages can make such a difference in the outcome and their overall experience with M&A at large.
Yeah, I really like what you said there in the first half of that about just feeling more prepared for it than perhaps they are because they've been on the sidelines of that journey, right? But, I liken it to, there's research that looks at the way financial advisors, the sort of the biases they fall into with their own money versus client money. And you see that financial advisors in many respects are not great with their own money, but they are very good with client money. And we're good at giving dispassionate advice. I mean, this applies to dating and marriage and things like that too, right? Like we can see our friend's relationship and spot red flags in it that we can't see in our own. And it's an entirely different ballgame when it's your money, your baby, your business. And having been a peripheral party to that doesn't prepare you for battle.
That same thing with the money concept and the advisor, and how they manage. Is the exact same with an M&A. They're fabulous at being a guide for their clients and being that sounding board. But when it's so close, it's so personal.
Yeah, for sure. So one of our past guests said something brilliant. It was Jackie Wilkie, credit where credit's due. She said that you are the most interesting thing about your business and was really just encouraging sort of advisors to lead with their personality, to show who they are, to keep that front and center. You see so many deals get done, so many transactions get done. If you were to give advisors one piece of advice about sort of maximizing maximizing that number or maximizing their sellability, what would you tell them to do to really stand out in a very, very crowded field?
Yes, I think the best story, the absolute best story is their story. Their unique story, just like Jackie said. When they're themselves through the M&A process and showcase how they've grown the business, how they think about the advisor-client relationship, what their advisors love about the firm, what their clients love about the experience, that's the story that people want to hear. It truly is like, how have they gotten to this point and how do they think about growth? And, I think the best thing that somebody can do if they're thinking about inorganic growth at some point down the future, whether it's selling their business or becoming a buyer, it's to not lose sight of the business, which is the advisor-client relationship and the organic growth. Sometimes you can see how inorganic growth can be a shiny object. So when people think about a future sale, some people will think, well, maybe I need to be like the headlines and become a buyer for a period of time before I think about that next chapter or that future sale. But the best thing that they can do is to focus on organic growth, taking care of their clients, and knowing and being so proud of their own story, because that is the story that matters.
So, I mean, that's a message that's deeply resonant with the whole sort of thesis of this podcast and all my writing and speaking and things like that. Does it present a problem, though, at transaction time when it's like, okay, is there a little bit of a cult of personality problem where it's like, okay, this whole thing has been built around this person and now it's changing hands? Does that make the handoff harder? And is there anything we can do to grow with that personality in mind, but make the handoff easier?
When you think about the sale and the transaction, a lot of times people think about what impact does that have on the client? And the most important thing to be thinking about all throughout the transaction process is the client experience. In an ideal transaction that's successful, the client will be stepping into an opportunity to have a client experience enhancement. That's what success looks like for the client, right? And that's what matters. I think that sometimes it gets lost that the reason why a client is a client of XYZ firm is because the name on the back of the jersey, not the name. I just gave myself a thumbs up. Not the name on the front. And so when the transaction does happen, the number one way to ensure a seamless transition, whatever that transition may look like, is to really be thoughtful on, keeping the client at the core focus and making sure that communication is enhanced at a time when it might be natural to lessen communication, right? The advisors might not have as much information about, the perfect new pitch about the new XYZ firm name. And so having, the challenge of, continuing to have conversations with clients and have that strong client experience, that is imperative.
So I think a lot of times when we talk about deal making, a lot of what gets focused on is the numbers. But, the reason that we are friends is because you have a real focus on the human side of the transaction. Speak with me, if you would, about what does it mean to humanize this transaction from every angle, from the client perspective, from the advisor perspective, and what role does talent play in getting a premium for what you've built?
Yes, lots to unpack there. That is a great question. When you think about humanizing the M&A process, it starts at the very beginning of having a conversation around what the hopes and dreams are of the founder, of what success looks like from a M&A event, from an outcome. So thinking about the end at the beginning, but also talking about your fears. And what about a transaction makes you nervous? What about a transaction causes you concern or pause or whatever it may be? Because when you have both the not only the hopes and dreams, but the fears, that knowledge helps really guide the individual where they are, right? Forget about all the other transactions. Every transaction process is so different because of the human element. Because what matters to one founder is different than, the next founder and what their goals and what they want in their future and all of those variables. So humanizing the M&A process really boils down to really spending time on the psychological elements, psychological drivers, the fears, and keeping that in mind throughout the entire process and creating space from start to finish to do those check-ins and have, conversations about the emotional side of the journey. Because there's going to be all sorts of emotions. There's going to be the excitement phase of, meeting all these potential partners. There's going to be, the fear side as well, right? At certain points in the process. And then there's also the natural overwhelm, it is a big undertaking and it's a big commitment. And so feeling overwhelmed at different, points of the journey is normal too. And it's about leaning on, your right partner to help navigate you through that journey. So that is what we kind of think about when we think about humanizing the process as it comes to the talent piece that you brought up and really thinking about how to, maximize the opportunity set for the next gen. The next gen have a really unique opportunity in M&A to have a, entirely enhanced career pathing set, and the really amazing founders that have next gen. One of the biggest things that you see that drives value for the overall business during an M&A event is the founder's ability to recognize that they may be and have been the rainmaker. And that is fabulous because the business wouldn't be where it is today without that rainmaking. But the future of the business, the legacy, is the next gen. And so how is that founder, helping provide opportunities for the next gen to grow in not only their ability to take amazing care and service the clients, but business development? That is something that, you have to practice, you have to have a mentor and you have to be able to see it and see what a good, business development leader, does and how they take an opportunity from start to finish and be able to see it enough, but then also be willing to take that step to try it yourself. And, you're not going to close every, new client, but it's that repetitive exercise and that coaching and that encouragement. And so the difference between, two firms, a lot of the times, two firms can both have next-gen talent. The differentiator comes down to has the firm with next-gen talent and the rainmaker actually had the ability to turn the next-gen into future rainmakers and started doing that? Or is the firm, have the next-gen only servicing, the clients in which the founder, passes down?
I got a little bit of a sad note in earlier this week. So one of the advisors I've worked closely with here in a nearby southern state passed away quite unexpectedly. And I got a note from, I was part of an email blast that went out from his office notifying his clientele about his passing. And I had just met at our recent Orion conference, I had just met the person who he had chosen to succeed him. And I know that he had been working with this person for some time, and this person was very capable and very competent and very capable. This advisor is one of the best advisors I ever met. And, he had this really cool thing he had a focus on sort of purpose-driven investing and really helping people reach their dreams. And so when you walked into his office, there was a big world map, and it was, all the places around the world where people had vacation, where they had taken their grandkids, where there was a lot of mission work, like where people had done mission work and things like that. And he needed someone. I mean, he was a very particular advisor. I mean, he was like a singular guy and a special guy. But it made me so glad when this email came out, because I've spoken to his clientele before and they were special clients, It made me so glad that he had the foresight, because he died relatively young, that he had the foresight to know, I'm going to need this next gen talent, and I'm going to need someone who fits the culture and can serve this unique brand of client that I work with. So, I mean, I was very sad by his passing, but happy that he had the presence of mind to do that, even though he had never been sick, right? Like it was very sudden. He had never been sick, and it was just a very sudden thing. And I think sometimes we don't want to own that we won't be around forever. Or we don't want to own that we won't always be that rainmaker. And it's just so critical.
It is. You never want to, there is a fear of thinking about the end, right? The end of your, career, whatever that may look like. That's scary, because a lot of the times it comes back to, what does that look like and what does that mean for me and, your own identity and direction that you'll, that next chapter. But I have seen time and time again what happens when, like what you said, like when somebody doesn't take the time to think about what succession looks like, you may wind up in a position where the outcome is less than, what you were expecting, because it wasn't, thought through. One of the most traumatizing succession opportunities that I ever met an individual, and he wanted to start thinking about kind of his succession of the business. He had an illness that he just found the diagnosis out about. It was a cognitive diagnosis, and so he wanted to make sure that he could explore other options, beyond just the one that he was originally thinking about. And within 1 month from having that initial conversation, he called me back and said, it's been, he got the due diligence and all of that, but he had a hard time completing it because his cognitive, illness started to impact it so heavily that he said, the easiest path for me is to just stay, go down the original, the path and not explore, take it to market or to explore what that could look like. And you just realize then that that was not the desired, path for him. But he didn't have a choice. And so sometimes it's easy to take for granted our health and think that just because today's great, tomorrow's going to be great, and the next week's going to be great. And, you always hope that is the case. But having a plan and training, I think the key in your story is that former leader really took the time and energy to help mentor and, grow him into that next new role. So that's imperative.
Yeah.
Well, difference.
This is a great segue to my next question. We're talking about this fear of obsolescence, this fear of the end, and not wanting to lose our step or lose our vibrancy. I'll tell a quick digression to tell a story about one of the first guests on this show was a friend and a mentor of mine who's, quite a bit older than me, in my hometown in North Alabama. He sold his business for an incredible amount of money, like a life-changing amount of money. He was like he's like the Dos Equis guy. Like he's like a spy, a Green Beret, sold a corporate espionage firm. I mean, just a fascinating guy who was used to being in the thick of it. And he reminds me of a lot of advisors, because successful advisors are almost universally well-read, charismatic. Like there's a lot that they have in common. And he sold his business and he got cards made that had his name on it. And then under it, it said former person. because he felt, after decades of being this mover and shaker, this person that people respected and people wanted to meet him and talk to him and whatever, he felt like he sold his business and lost his identity. Now, he was kind of a funny, sarcastic guy. I mean, it was somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but there was a lot of truth there. And there was a lot of truth to this card that said former person. It was basically like, I used to be a big deal and now I'm not. And I feel like we don't talk about that loss enough, right? For a lot of advisors, this is their baby. This is their blood, sweat, and tears. My dad is an advisor. He got his job on the day I was born. And I remember the first couple of years of, into my childhood, he was just grinding, cold calls, it's different now, but cold calls, long hours. And it's like when he goes to sell this, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in that thing. How do we honor? How do we get past? How do we respect this truism that advisors have put so much into a business and parting with it? It's not about just a big payday. There's more there psychologically.
That is one of the most important things that needs more attention and more conversation, because that loss is incredibly isolating.
Yeah.
Because they don't feel like they should experience it, right? They just had this, successful event, and it's in a lot of ways, it's kind of like completing a marathon. A lot of the times you hear marathon runners complete a marathon, and then there's an element for, right after where they get a little sad.
Right.
Because you train, there's this journey, and then you complete it and you're so proud of yourself and it's amazing. But there is that element of, oh, I did that. I wasn't even sure when I started training if I could. Yeah. We hear a lot of the times about founders when they start their business, they start from nothing.
Yeah.
And they grow into this amazing business that far exceeded all of their expectations. And so the identity loss is something that's so important to talk about. And when we talked about the humanizing M&A, that's another element of it, right? It's having conversations about, what gives them purpose, what makes them feel fulfilled. My favorite question is if a founder had a whiteboard and it had all the times of a day listed, how would they spend their day? Their perfect day. What does that look like? And then they contrast it to how they're spending their time today. And then we have conversation about, okay, in this next chapter, how can you find ways to do more of your perfect day, have more perfect days than, where you're at today? And so it's starting to have the conversations about that emotional element of, yes, two things can be true. You can be both extraordinarily happy and feel accomplished, but that element of, who am I and what's next is also there and present. And one of the things that makes wealth management particularly unique is in most transactions, the founder stays on for a period of time. And that is a beautiful thing, and also a very complicated thing too, for the founder to kind of, rethink that identity within a new organization. It is, the beauty in it is that the things they love about why they started the business, the clients, they're still able to maintain those client relationships and have that. And I think that is purposeful for them. But also it is important just for them to think about, what does that dynamic and that look like for them in this new role within this new firm. I think, you nailed it in terms of when you think about humanizing M&A, it's talking about the emotions. And one of the emotions that you deal with is loss.
I really like that exercise of just sort of hour by hour, because I think we over-index. I mean, like my whole book is about this. we over-index on money as sort of a substitute for meaning or happiness. And so I think the thought is we get wrapped up in the deal itself and go, well, of course I'm going to be happy. I'm going to have, X amount of dollars after this deal gets done. And like, who wouldn't be? And I know my friend felt that way because for the outside looking in, like, I mean, even for me at the time, I think I was in my late 20s, early 30s when I first met him. And it's like, oh my gosh, I mean, this guy has just more money than I could ever dream of. Like, how could he not be happy? But it's like there were other pieces missing. And so planning for the relational part of that, work provides us with a lot. Like work provides us with relationship. Work provides us with opportunities for learning and growth and contributions back to the community and being needed. Like those needs aren't going anywhere the day after you sell your business. So, well, where will you go to get those needs met? I think on that hour by hour basis is a brilliant way to think about it. One of the things that I've seen, throughout the industry, and again, I'm part of an organization where there's a great deal of inorganic growth. I mean, just speaking with us, I came over as part of an asset management firm based in the Northeast, right? With a very sort of white glove, high touch, old money sophistication to it. And then we are acquired by a Midwestern firm, a Midwestern tech firm that has, again, good people both places, but it's like the Midwestern tech firm has the different uniform that they wear. They have a different approach. They have a different attitude. They have a different client service model. None of those things have proven problematic, but it's like, definitely there were some conversations and some growing pains about like, well, what do we wear to a conference? And the things like these guys are wearing hoodies and we're all wearing pinstripe suits, When you think about cultural fit, how do you concretize that? If you're thinking about cultural fit, we know it's so important, but I feel like it can be hard to get our arms around. For someone who's doing that due diligence, how do you counsel them to make the cultural fit piece, which can feel kind of ethereal, how do they make that practical?
When you think about culture within wealth management, it's all the more important because you're talking about a relationship business, a business foundationally built on relationships. And so the culture is imperative to get right. So when you think about trying to get it right, there's no substitute for time and spending time with both parties in conversation and really trying to get a feel for what does a day in the life at XYZ firm truly look like, and go through all the pieces and segments of the business to get a real feel for what it looks like. I think, just as important as, the in-office experience of trying to understand those pieces, there's also no substitute for building relations over dinner and like having a conversation and getting to know them as people. Because in a relationship world, there's all sides of a person, right? And so, the business side, all those boxes from a cultural perspective may check, but it's also important to make sure that you like spending time with them and there's alignment there. And so there is no substitute for relationship building. Sometimes you see, particularly when you go at it alone, there's a fear of sometimes asking those harder, maybe more uncomfortable or awkward questions. But this is the season where you have to do it, right? You have to ask the hard questions, and especially around some of the cultural qualitative pieces, because that is going to help inform and validate the decision you make, which is the biggest one in your lifetime.
I think there's value to asking the people, like the boots on the ground too. Like a lot of times I think companies think that their culture is whatever's on the sign in the break room. My favorite example of this is Enron famously had their cultural values like literally written in stone when you were driving up and it's like trust, open dialogue, all this stuff. And you're like, oh my gosh, like nothing nothing could be further from the truth. How do those things live out day to day and the people that work there, and then making sure there's alignment there?
In testing those in different markets, right? So if you're considering a firm that has multiple locations, geographies, each geography might have a little bit of a different flavor. And so just understanding their experience, their approach, what works, what doesn't, all of that is so valuable in kind of really getting a feel for what it truly is like.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. I'll never forget, as a kid from Alabama, I will never forget my first big boy job. I finished my PhD and my first client was from New York. Like I was doing consulting work and I was with a large company out of New York. And I just thought they were mad at me constantly. They were so loud. They were so loud and they talked so fast. And, I had to really, different approaches play differently in different places, and understanding that at the location level, I think is great advice. So I'm excited about this next question because any appearance on Standard Deviations is going to warrant some discussion of behavioral bias and sort of the behavioral biases that trip up folks when they're trying to make a transaction of this size. How do people get in their own heads? How do they get in their own way when they're trying to make this happen? Yes,
this one makes me laugh. I have read your book, which I think every single advisor should read. I think you had some chapters on here. The Time Will Never Be Right was a really good chapter.
Thank you.
I think a lot of the time when you're contemplating, doing something, you think about, okay, I'm waiting for this perfect time. And the time's never going to be perfect. I actually had a client send me this long list. And the client said, here are all of the things going on in my life, simultaneous to trying to make the biggest decision of, my career. And it's just, you wait for this perfect window, maybe when your personal life doesn't have, all these things going on, or the perfect season, right? You sometimes think maybe there's a perfect season for transactions. I get asked that a lot. The time's never going to be right. If you wait for the perfect time, you will never, you'll never find it. And then you had another chapter in here, I'll be happy when is a trap. Mm-hmm. That is something you see a lot in pre-M&A founder mindset. So whether it's an AUM goal, whether it's a revenue goal, an EBITDA goal, maybe it's they want to add this advisor and transition all their clients, or whatever it is, what you tend to find is whenever they hit that milestone, it's a trap, like you say. And they're actually not happy. And then what ends up happening 9 times out of 10, the goalpost gets extended. And they're critiquing themselves because they go, gosh, maybe I didn't make my goal hard enough. So let's elevate it and, kick the can down to this next new, milestone. And I love to spend time with those founders and say, what's driving? What's driving this goal? And why does this goal impact this decision? And how do they relate? And sometimes they do. But a lot of the times they have, there's no real, science behind why they made this number up. So I thought that was a really interesting chapter. And then the last one you said is time is the ultimate purchase. You said a lot of other great things in there, but I flagged those as ones I thought were so relevant to my world. Just because an advisor can do it doesn't mean that they should with their time. And, thinking about your time as your most expensive asset really helps you think about, your life from a different perspective, and especially during an M&A event. I think the biggest mistake you see a lot of founders make is, getting just overly distracted and taking their eye off the business to go do this strategic endeavor. And so that's where having help can be really valuable to allow for them to stay focused. So thanks for letting me share some of the good nuggets out of your book. But I think they do, in terms of mistakes that advisors tend to make, they really do resonate really well and parallel nicely to the M&A landscape.
Well, she wasn't paid to say that, folks. Thank you very much. I'm glad you enjoyed the book. I was on the podcast this morning of a young man who like mid-20s who has built up an incredible online following, and he read the book and he enjoyed it. He wanted to have me on and share some things with his viewers. And at the end, we were talking about life, and he is on the cusp of getting married. And first of all, he insulted me very deeply because he's like, look, I know you have kids. He's like, are your kids grown? And I was like, how old do you think I am? I am a 7-year-old. Like, no, what? So anyway, once I recovered from him thinking I was very much older than I am, I was able, he was like, I want kids, but, things are crazy with the business and, there's just a lot going on right now. And I was like, look, man, the business won't get any easier. Like, life won't get any less hectic. If you want it, now's the time.
Yeah.
Then to your second point, I'm one of my best friends I'm super proud of him. He's on the cusp of selling his business. He's about to make a lot of money, and he keeps pushing the goalpost back. He's not in our industry, so he keeps pushing the goalpost back. And he's like, well, hey, he's kind of miserable. He's kind of miserable, like works very heavy, right? And he keeps pushing the goalposts back, and he's like, well, hey, if I give it another 6 months, it'll be another $5 million. And I just have to say, time is your most precious asset. And what can you do with X large amount of money that you can't do with X plus 5 million? Like nothing, right? So humankind is not wired for enough. We're not wired for completion. We're not wired for enough. We're wired to keep moving the goalposts. And that leads us to some really good places, right? It leads us to push and grow and want to achieve more. But it also leads us, if we index on the wrong things and we're not careful, it can lead us to think things will make us happy or think things will bring us completion that won't.
There's a study that Harvard did. I'm sure you saw it about, they take all these individuals and study them through their whole life. And it's a happiness study.
Yeah, I read that book. Yeah.
It's such a good one. And it really is. It boils down to you can be the most successful individual. And what they ended up finding was sometimes the most successful people were not as happy because along the way, they compromised their time with family, with friends, with the community in exchange for the pursuit of success. I am an M&A expert, right? Like I live in, transact success all day. And that is so important. But you can't lose sight of what truly drives happiness, which is relationships. And so when you pour into relationships, friendships, family, the client relationships, your team relationships, those give back dividends, right? And keep that purpose and that fire inside that drives the happiness. It's not the success, and it's not the things that we think and we're, driven by. It's the relationships.
Yeah. It's a perfect place to shut it down. You've given us some incredible insights today. Where can people, you're a prolific LinkedIn poster. You and I have some combo posts we'll be sharing about sort of the psychology of M&A. If people want to follow you on social, if they want to learn more about about your business, where can they find you?
They can follow us at Hue Partners on LinkedIn and visit the website at huepartners.com to learn more.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Emily. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Standard Deviations. If you can't wait till next week for more behavioral finance insights, visit www.orion.com. All opinions expressed by Dr. Daniel Crosby and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of or endorsement by Orion and its affiliates, subsidiaries, and employees. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for legal, tax, and investment decisions. The opinions are based upon information the participants consider reliable.